Oh, I'm ready.
Okay. Welcome. This lesson is called Great American Women You've Never Heard of. We are presenting interviews with 7 women. Our reporter, Baba Wawa, who is going to have fictional interviews with these women about their lives and accomplishments. We have great respect for each of these women, and this lesson is written to honor them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Baba Wawa. Today I have the privilege of interviewing 7 women from American history. You may have never heard of these women, but they all had significant contributions toward the progress of women in the United States. We will be talking to Sojourner Truth, a former slave, Mary Edwards Walker, who received the Congressional Medal of Honor, Mary Fields, the first black woman to be a U.S. postal carrier, Alice Paul, a suffragette, Barbara Mcclintock, who won the Nobel Prize solo, Rachel Carson, who taught us to save our wildlife, and Peggy Whitson, astronaut. A very exciting lineup. My first guest is Sojourner Truth. Welcome, Miss Truth.
Thank you for inviting me. You may call me Sojourner.
Well, thank you. You were born Isabella Bonfrey in 1797 in Ulster County, New York. You were born in New York State, but you were a slave?
Yes, I find that many people do not know that there were slaves in the northern states.
I will hazard a guess that the slave owners in the north were as cruel as the slave owners in the south. I understand that you were owned by a family of Dutch descent. That accounts for your slight accent.
Yes. As a little girl, I only spoke Dutch. And that turned out to be quite a problem for me. I was sold when I was 9 years old, and the man that bought me would beat me because I didn't know English. After that, I was sold 2 more times, and yes, I did learn to speak English. My last owner, his name was John Dumont. He forced me to marry one of his male slaves, a man named Thomas. And by 1826, I had 5 children.
In 1799, New York State passed a law to gradually abolish slavery. According to this law, people who were slaves as of 1799 would remain slaves, while their children born after 1799 would be indentured servants of the slave owner until they were in their mid-20s. That law made no sense.
Many people thought so. Finally, in 1817, a new law was passed. This law would free all the slaves and indentured servants, but not until July 4th of 1827.
So for 10 years later, you were a slave and your children were indentured servants until 1827.
Yes, and that's why I made an agreement with Dumont that he would free me in 1826. The agreement was that if I spun a certain amount of wool for him, despite the injury to my hand, he would free me. I completed the work, but he changed his mind, and he would not free me.
So you ran away?
No, I walked away from a broken promise. I took my infant daughter and walked over to the neighbor's house, and their name was Van Wagenen. But you see, they were abolitionists. They bought my freedom from Dumont for $20, and as revenge, Dumont sold my 5-year-old son to slave traders from Alabama.
That's terrible. You sued Dumont in court and won your son back. Do you realize that you're the first African-American woman to win a lawsuit in the U.S. against a white man? Congratulations.
Thank you. After that, I moved to New York City, and I became a housekeeper for Elijah Pearson, an evangelist preacher. And he taught me the Bible. I memorized every blessed word, because you see, I can't read or write.
That was quite an accomplishment. When Pastor Pearson died, you joined a Methodist church. This was 1843, the same year in which you changed your name to Sojourner Truth.
The Spirit of God told me to relay the truth, so I took the name of Sojourner Truth. I put my belongings in a pillowcase and set out, because when the Spirit calls me, I must go.
I'm told that you are a charismatic speaker, which we can see. Frederick Douglass thought so he asked you to join him on a speaking tour for the abolitionist movement.
We toured together for a while, but Frederick could not see that women's rights go hand in hand with civil rights. So we went our separate ways.
In 1850, you wrote your autobiography, or rather you dictated it to Olive Gilbert. He helped you get it published. It's entitled The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, a Northern Slave.
The money that I earned for the sale of that book gave me income.
The next year, 1851, you were invited to speak at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention. There you gave your famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech.
I said, I have plowed, reaped, I have husked, chopped, and mowed. Can any man do more than that?
Well said. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, you rallied black men to enlist as Union soldiers. You even sent them care packages to the front. Abraham Lincoln invited you to the White House in 1864. That's very impressive.
He told me that he appreciated my work. I was sorry that he was taken so soon. I began a new crusade in 1870. I went to Washington, D.C. to get federal approval for land grants in the West for black veterans. But unfortunately, Congress would not pass them.
So you were invited to the White House again. This time you had a chat with President Grant.
Yes, but after that, I moved to Michigan, where my daughters lived. I was 75 years old and tired.
Thank you for telling us about your extraordinary life.
You are very welcome.
Sojourner Truth died in Battle Creek, Michigan in November 26, 1883. 1,000 people were at her funeral. There are many statues, plaques, and busts of her. Even has a portion of an interstate named after her. In 2009, a bust of her was unveiled in Emancipation Hall in the U.S. Capitol's Visitor Center. Our next guest, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. She is the only woman to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Welcome.
I am honored.
Dr. Walker, please tell the audience about your background.
Yes, of course. I was born November 26, 1832 in Oswego, New York. I graduated from Syracuse Medical College in 1855, and I married a Dr. Albert Miller. We had a private practice together, but it was a struggle because most people would not go to a female doctor.
And then the Civil War broke out.
Yes. I felt it was my duty to be to work in the Union Army as a medical surgeon, but the Army would not allow women to serve in the military, so I volunteered.
And you worked in that as a medical surgeon in that terrible war without any pay.
Yes, I did. Finally, in 1863, the military accepted my credentials, and I became a surgeon for the War Department, with the pay equivalent of an Army lieutenant.
And you were still denied a military commission, even though you were right on the front lines. In fact, you were captured by Southern troops and accused of being a spy.
I was giving medical aid to civilians in enemy territory when I was captured, but I was returned to the Union Army in a prisoner swap.
Were you a spy?
I simply gave help to civilians and occasionally to a Confederate soldier. Now, anything that I happened to hear, I passed on to headquarters.
I read that you were always wearing men's pants, even on your wedding day, in fact. You were arrested in New Orleans in 1870 for dressing like a man. Is that true?
Well, I explained to the judge that I was not wearing men's clothes, I was wearing my clothes. But the judge was not amused. The simple fact is that corsets and hoop skirts are not conducive to practicing as a doctor. I need to be flexible, and women's attire doesn't allow for that. When I was younger, I wore pants under my dresses, but now I wear whatever I choose to wear.
I understand that you tried to register to vote in 1871, but women didn't have the vote until 1920. Then you attempted to run for the U.S. Senate in 1881. And you attempted to run for the House of Representatives in 1890. You are unflappable, aren't you?
I had to try. All my life, I've had to show men that I am their equal.
In 1865, President Andrew Johnson thought you were equal to a man. He awarded you the Congressional Medal of Honor for your dedicated work as an Army surgeon and for your bravery in crossing enemy lines to save soldiers and devotion of duty.
I was so proud to receive that medal, I wore it every day of my life.
Thank you for spending time with us today.
I was honored to do so. Thank you.
Our government rescinded Dr. Walker's Congressional Medal of Honor in 1917, 2 years before she died at age 87. She refused to give the medal back. In 1977, President Carter restored the honor to Dr. Walker. She remains the only woman to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. I would like to introduce you to Mary Fields, also known as Stagecoach Mary. We're glad to have you that you wandered over from Montana to visit us today.
Y'all can leave the stagecoach behind, just call me Mary.
Well, thank you, Mary. You were born into slavery in Tennessee around 1832. President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed you in 1863. What did you do after you were freed?
Well, after the Civil War, I got a job as a chambermaid in a Mississippi steamboat called the Robert E. Lee. Can you believe that?
How ironic.
I met a Mr. Dunn at the steamboat, and he offered me a job as a housemaid and a nanny to his 5 children. Well, I took the job. Then his wife died, and he sent his 5 children and me to his sister in Toledo, Ohio.
I understand that Mr. Dunn's sister was a Mother Superior in a Catholic convent. Her name was Mother Amadeus?
Yep, that's right. And it gets even better. In 1884, the Catholic Church sent Mother Amadeus to St. Peter's Mission in Montana Territory to open a school for Native American girls. She had to leave me behind. Well, I got news that she caught pneumonia out there, and I traveled out there as fast as I could to tend to her.
Well, you did a great job of Mother Amadeus' recovery. You decided to stay at the mission in Montana.
Yep. I became the head worker there. I did repairs, the gardening, tend to the chickens. I fetched supplies. I did whatever was needed to be done.
I heard that the Native Americans there called you White Crow because you acted like a white person, but you were black. However, adapting to life in a Catholic mission had challenges for you.
Well, I've always been rough and tumble. I drink, I smoke cigars, I cuss real good. I don't back down from a fight. There was this feller who worked for the mission, and he didn't like working for a woman. But we got in a fist fight, and he pulled a gun on me. Well, let me just tell you that he left that place in a hurry.
That was a career changer. The bishop barred you from the mission. This was 1894.
Yes, sir. In 1895, I signed a contract to deliver mail for the U.S. Postal Service. The nuns helped me get approved. My route was between Cascade and St. Peter's Mission. I drove the stagecoach through snow and rain. I beat off wolves, both the four-legged and the two-legged kind. I never missed a day of work. If the snow was too deep, I got on my snowshoes and I walked the mail through.
You were 62 years old. How did you beat off the wolves?
With my rifle and my Smith & Wesson .38 pistol.
That would do it. You delivered mail for 8 years and then retired at 70 years of age to the town of Cascade. I understand that the mayor granted you an exemption, so you, as a woman, would be allowed in the saloon.
I think the people of Cascade really like me. They rebuilt my house when it burned down. They was real nice folks. Well, I gotta leave. Goodbye, everyone.
Mary was the first African-American woman to deliver mail for the U.S. Postal Service. Mary was indeed well loved by the townspeople of Cascade. When she died in 1914, the whole town attended the funeral. They also paid for her burial in the town cemetery. I have the distinct privilege to welcome Dr. Alice Stokes Paul, PhD. If it were not for Dr. Paul and her compatriots 100 years ago, women would still be waiting to be allowed to vote in the United States.
Thank you for that it was a long, hard struggle, but worth it. You may address me as Alice.
Well, thank you. You were born in Morristown, New Jersey on January 11th, 1885. You lived You lived an affluent life on your family farm. You were Quakers.
We were Hicksite Quakers. This means that we grew up to believe in gender equality. My mother belonged to the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
In 1905, you earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. After college, you traveled to New York City to train as a social worker, but you didn't care for that work.
I witnessed the plight of the poor, and I saw in a very short time that I was never going to be a social worker, because I could see that social workers were not doing what needed to be done in the world. You couldn't change the situation by social work. So I went back to school and got a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in 1907. And then I took a trip to England.
Where your real education began.
Yes, the women's suffragettes in England had gone past lectures in rented halls and luncheons in private homes. They turned to militant tactics. They disrupted government meetings. They picketed outside government buildings. They did rallies in the streets, and they broke windows.
You were arrested several times while there. It must have been effective because the women in England won the right to vote 2 years before the U.S. did. You returned to the U.S. in 1910 and entered the University of Pennsylvania. Again, this time you earned a PhD in sociology. But getting the vote for women was your primary concern. The suffragettes of the past, such as Susan B. Anthony, believed that women must win the right to vote by having each state change their voting law. You saw that the federal amendment to the U.S. Constitution would be a more effective solution.
It really was the only way. Some states would never have changed their voting laws. So I teamed up with Lucy Burns and Crystal Eastman. We organized a women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. on March 2nd, 1913. We walked down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. We chose that date because it was the day before President Wilson's first inauguration. We had 5,000 women that participated in that parade.
And the women were jeered and assaulted by some of the onlookers. And many of the police just looked on. I suspect they had orders not to interfere. After all, President Woodrow Wilson was not a supporter of women's rights. You did get the publicity you were hoping for, didn't you?
We did. Our next plan was to do something that had never been done before. We picketed the front gate of the White House. We called ourselves Silent Sentinels. We didn't say a word. We just held banners that read, "Mr. President, what are you going to do for women's suffrage? And how long must women wait for liberty, Mr. President?" We picketed 6 days a week in every kind of weather, and we began January 10th, 1917, and we picketed for 10 months.
You were a very committed group.
Yes. The police would arrest us for such crimes as obstructing traffic, and we would be released and the same day, and we kept going back to the picket line. The police continued to arrest us, and then the judges began to increase our jail time, but we kept returning to the picket line.
On November 14th, 1917, 33 suffragettes who were arrested were taken to Aqua prison in Virginia. The prison cells were filthy, there was worm-ridden food and bedding, and the water was filthy. When the women went on hunger strike, the warden of the prison ordered his prison guards to teach these women a lesson. The guards beat the women, threw them against the walls. They force-fed the women by inserting a tube down their throat and pouring in hot mush.
We called it the Night of Terrors. I was force-fed by the tube method. Then I was taken to the district psychiatric prison, where the authorities planned to commit me. Thank goodness the doctor in charge would not commit me. He said, "Courage in a woman is often mistaken for insanity." The guards took me back to prison. The public found out about the treatment and pressured the Court of Appeals to release the women and drop the charges. And President Wilson realized that the winds were blowing in a different direction, and he changed his stance on women's voting. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, and it barely passed by 1 vote.
He went back to school and earned a law degree in 1922. Thank you, Alice, for being with us today, and thank you for our right to vote.
It was a great accomplishment, and you are welcome. All of you are welcome. Thank you.
Alice worked the rest of her life to get the first version of Equal Rights Amendment passed. It did not happen. She died July 9th, 1977 in Morristown, New Jersey, not far from where she was born. Our next extraordinary guest won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. She was the first woman to win the prize by herself. Dr. Barbara Mcclintock, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, since we are both called Barbara, you had better call me Doctor. Did you know that my parents originally named me Eleanor? Then later they decided that Eleanor was too feminine for me, so they changed my name to Barbara.
Oh, really? Okay, you were born in June 16th, 1902, in Hartford, Connecticut. You were one of 4 children. I understand that you were sent to live with your aunt and uncle in Brooklyn, New York, when you were very young.
Yes, my father was struggling to establish a medical practice, and he was having financial problems. So they sent me away. Eventually, the whole family ended up in Brooklyn.
Your mother did not want you to go to college, but your father interviewed and allowed you to enroll in Cornell University College of Agriculture.
My mother and I did not see eye to eye. She was afraid that if I went to college, I'd never catch a husband. I should have told her that I wasn't looking for one. I earned a bachelor's degree of science in 1923 and a master's in 1925 and a PhD in 1927 in botany. Genetics was where my interest really lied. I received several fellowships that allowed me to concentrate my research on the genetics of corn.
I should say you did. You received fellowships from Guggenheim Foundation, the National Research Council, the California Institute of Technology. Your research got you elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1944. You were only the third woman to receive this honor.
Well, in 1960, I took a group of students to South America to research the genetics of corn. South America has several varieties of corn, and I was able to expand my studies. I was there for 10 years, and I received the National Medal of Science for my work in 1970.
That's impressive. You won the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 1983, the first woman to win this prize alone. Did you know that you are still the only woman to win any Nobel Prize by yourself? Could you tell us what you discovered that prompted you to win the Nobel Prize?
Oh, I'd be glad to. My research focused on developing ways to visualize and characterize corn chromosomes. I developed a technique using Karman staining to visualize corn chromosomes. And this showed the first time metamorphology of 10 corn chromosomes. I discovered the DNA sequence which can create and mutilate cells. And this is called genetic transposition.
Fascinating, Dr. McClintock. You did not add that your discoveries have had major effect on everything from genetic engineering to cancer research. Thank you for your extraordinary accomplishments.
I was glad to have helped. I am still doing the research which I love doing. And I must go now because I have something cooking on the Bunsen burner.
In 2005, the U.S. Postal Service put Dr. McClintock's face on a postage stamp commemorating American scientists. She died in 1992 at the age of 90. The lady that you're about to meet has been credited with saving the bald eagle, the peregrine falcon, and countless other wildlife just by writing a book. Please may I introduce Rachel Pearson.
What a lovely introduction. I am delighted to be here.
How did your concern for wildlife begin?
Well, I grew up on my family's farm in rural Pennsylvania, and we had 65 acres. And I loved to wander through the fields and see the birds and the wildlife.
You were born not far from there in the town of Springdale in May 27th, 1907. Reading and writing stories were your other interests. Were you really actually published at the age of 10?
Yes. I wrote a short story, and it was published in a children's magazine.
A graduate of Pennsylvania College for Women, now called Chatham University, in 1929, you were magna cum laude with a BA degree in biology. Then you attended Johns Hopkins University and received a master's degree in zoology in 1932.
Yes, my hope was to get a doctorate, but my family experienced financial problems. It was the Great Depression. I got a teaching position at the University of Maryland in 1934. Then my father died in 1935, so I took on the care of my mother. In 1936, I was hired for a temporary job at the Bureau of Fisheries. I wrote copy for a radio program called Romance Under the Sea. The idea of the show was to educate the public on fish biology in a way they could understand.
Dry stuff. But you had the skill to make the narrative come to life. Impressive. Your talent, it was in demand. You wrote articles for various periodicals such as Baltimore Sun, The Atlantic Monthly. Simon & Schuster Publishing Company suggested that you write a book.
Yes, that was very encouraging. I was finally hired for a full-time position at the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries. I was the second woman to get a full-time job at that place.
Your first book, Under the Sea Wind, was published in 1941. Your second book you wrote, The Sea Around Us, was a literary success. The public enjoyed your ability to paint vivid pictures of the sea and its creatures with your words.
It was on the New York Times bestseller list for a year and a half. But most important, it gave me financial independence. So I was able to resign my position at the Bureau, which by that time was called the Department of U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Your book was made into a film, which won an Academy Award for Best Documentary. Congratulations. I was not happy with that film. It was inaccurate, and I found it embarrassing. I swore that I would never allow any of my writings to be made into movies again. My third book was published in 1955 called The Edge of the Sea, and it was quite successful.
When did you first become aware of DDT?
See, I recall the first time I heard of DDT was in 1945. It was supposed to be this wonder formula, and it was to eradicate harmful insects. And from time to time, I would read about the impact it was having, both positive and negative. See, I began my research in earnest in 1957. I requested and received scientific data from concerned scientists, both government and private laboratories. It was obvious that that I was not the only one concerned with DDT. I studied the findings. I could see that DDT and other pesticides were having a detrimental effect on the birds and the animals and on humans. I wrote my book, Silent Spring, in 1960. It informed the public in a way that it could appreciate of the problem.
With a master's degree in zoology, you definitely had the credentials to back you up. Then in 1961, you discovered you had breast cancer, but you kept it to yourself. Why?
I didn't want anyone to be able to say that the data in my book was inaccurate because I was sick and confused.
Silent Spring was published in 1962. Then all heck broke loose. The chemical industry protested and threatened to sue you. A biochemist stated that you were going to return man to dark ages. But your research was indisputable. Thank you for sharing your life story with us, and a big thank you for saving the world from a terrible fate.
You are most welcome.
Silent Spring was heralded as the catalyst that began the environmental movement. Rachel Carson died of cancer on April 14, 1954. Our last great American woman is out of this world. Dr. Peggy Annette Whitson is a United States astronaut. She has spent more time in space than any other American astronaut, male or female. Please greet Dr. Peggy Whitson.
Thank you for that out-of-this-world introduction.
My pleasure. You were born February 9th, 1960 in Beaconsville, Iowa. You grew up on your family farm there in Iowa. From farm to NASA. How did that happen?
When I watched that first moon landing on television in 1969, I knew I had to become an astronaut.
In 1981, you earned a BA degree in biology and chemistry at Iowa's Wesleyan College. And you earned your doctorate degree in biochemistry at Rice University in Houston. In 1986, you moved to where the action is now.
I did. I came to work at the Johnson Space Center in Houston in 1988. I supervised the biochemistry research group. I became a member of the, get this, USSR Joint Working Group in Space Medicine and Biology.
What a mouthful. You became an astronaut candidate in 1966 and began the rigorous training.
Yes. My first mission was the Expedition 5. And that was on June 5th, 2002. We arrived at the International Space Station for a 6-month stay. And while I was there, I took a 4-hour and 25-minute spacewalk.
So you just decided to do a walkabout?
Well, that and I installed a micrometeoroid shielding on the Zephyr service module.
That was going to be my next guess. You returned to Earth on December 7th, 2002. Your second mission to the International Space Station was Expedition 16, October 10th, 2007. You did a walkabout in space 4 times on that trip.
Yes, and on my last walk, NASA informed me that I had spent more time outside of the space station than any other woman astronaut in NASA history. My next flight was November 19th, 2016. That was Expedition 5051, and I was the commander on Expedition 51. We returned to Earth September 3rd, 2017.
Well, wait a minute, Peggy. You didn't mention a few things. You became the oldest woman to fly in space. You became the oldest female spacewalker and accumulated more time in space than any astronaut, male or female. You were also the first female commander of the International Space Station, and you were the commander of Space Station twice.
It is so cool to do science in space.
To what do you attribute your phenomenal success?
I am driven to get the job done. I strive for efficiency, and I am willing to do extra work. I've been called a slave driver by people who work with me.
Well, your supervisor called it the Peggy factor. You must be driven. You retired in June of 2018, but you're going back to space next year.
I am. A private company called Axiom Space, heard of them? Has asked me to command the AX-2 space flight, which is slated to launch in 2023. We will be doing experiments for the 10X genomics company. It'll be a 10-day flight, and I am so excited to get back into space.
At age 62, you'll be back in space. We wish you a safe journey. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
I was delighted to do so.
Wow, what an amazing group of women. I hope you enjoyed their stories. These 7 women are remarkable as their lives. They are just a fraction of those American women who have accomplished amazing things. Yeah. Until next time, thank you for listening. This is Baba Walla saying goodbye.